G2 fans, come here. It's a new year. We're back. Third episode. My hairline continues receding per year. We have Harry coming out with just stats. Only the roll cells come here. And then we have Alex on, Mauisnake. Famous for never being on broadcast for a while. Now he's back. How you doing, Alex?
Great. You know, honestly, not doing broadcast for a while just solidified, it calcified my fan base even stronger than it ever was when I was scattered across various tournament organizers who would hire me at their whim. And now everybody can just find me at my own Twitch channel. So honestly, I think they enjoy it more like this.
Shameless plugs. Shameless plugs.
Exactly.
We're going to front load the stats this time around. Harry's going to give you the rundown. He's going to go through his regular PowerPoint, classic roll cell mentality. Alex, feel free to interrupt, of course. And Harry, take it away with your little slide here.
Yeah. So if anyone's seen like the stat check articles, I guess this is the version of that. But a quicker one, hopefully. So yeah, we're going to start with G2. And of course, you've got to frame G2. And the way you frame G2 is that they've chosen to get rid of NiKo. And that is the way we have to frame the whole way we talk about this G2 team, is that their CEO, he might have been salty. It might be PR. But at least publicly, we have to believe them. And they think that the right decision was to let NiKo leave and to rebuild. So we're looking at it under that lens, right? We're looking at if this was the right decision and if they're making the right call to try and future-proof a little bit. Because he's 27. They probably got quite a lot of money from him knowing where he went. But that might be a different podcast. But this is number one thing you need to remember is we're comparing this to the current team. This isn't a small organization. This is a big gamble, and that's the way we have to frame it. But yeah. But the roles, and everyone got a bit upset, mainly my fault, because I tweeted full roll cell about the old roles, because obviously malbs is not an anchor. So this is the new setup, because HeavyGod comes in and it's kind of the master plan kind of unravels, right? When you see HeavyGod come in, because not on Cloud9, but on OG, he was a very good anchor, and he got lots of praise for being this very good anchor. And this is kind of what we think their CT setup will be on Mirage, at least. I mean, it could change, of course, but this is our kind of predicted, and that's what those numbers are. So the numbers are 0% is like a full anchor, 100% is an AWPer or a full rotator. So we've kind of got Mauves and Hunter sharing rotate spots. Snax does the classic IGL thing on most maps, where sometimes he's rotating, sometimes he's anchor. HeavyGod's the full anchor. And this is already a much better sign if you're a Mavs fan, basically, because the stuff we've struggled with a lot watching Mavs is knowing that he's going to spend most of the CT side basically not seeing anyone. And through no fault of his own, he just doesn't get to make that many decisions in a round a lot of the time. Like they did try, but we're talking about a player who was 1.25 on CT side in a matey and was 1.05 in G2. And as we know from the way you watch him, like that's a role issue, first of all. But this HeavyGod signing does fix that. And we'll get into Malbs a bit later on in terms of whether he can replace NiKo fully. But for now, just bear in mind, everyone's more comfortable in this new roster, particularly Malbs.
Was HeavyGod playing A with OG?
He was playing short in OG.
Yeah, I thought he was playing
there's a few different ones
short.
well.
Yeah. Okay.
So he's one of those kind of like the kind of star anchors, I sometimes call them, because short feels like that kind of spot. It's like Axel was doing it in Cloud9 as well.
Yep.
So there's a few different ways they could do Mirage. I think this is more likely, probably, but it's a gamble. There's a lot of maps which are toss-ups, but primarily I think HeavyGod will be anchoring again. I don't think he's going to get his Cloud9 roles, which was connector and stuff like that. I think he's going to go back to OG.
That was him fitting in for them, though, because they had three people that wanted to anchor with Inter's, Axile, and him. Like, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And HeavyGod is that versatile player. So we're going to praise him a lot, I think. But it is NiKo. You've got to remember it's NiKo. And then T-side, it's, again, Malbs freed up again, because as much as he's been able to be much better on T-side and much more aggressive on T-side, he's doing that kind of from lurk spots on a lot of maps. Like NiKo did a few kind of different roles, but we're expecting HeavyGod to be a full lurk again now, which is, again, not what he was doing on Cloud9, but it was what he was doing on OG. So this is kind of a similar situation. It's Malbs benefiting from HeavyGod being a more natural lurker. And here we go. Got to do a bit of gloating. This is Malbs on T side and it's Malbs on CT side. And it's ridiculous. It's the same player, okay? He has an AK on T side, fine. He has a bit more freedom on T side, but this is just because he's playing in spots where he has to wait for action to come to him a lot of the time. He's just not able to be the player that we all know he's capable of. And okay, I think G2 were right to sign Malbs early because one, it meant no one else could sign him, and two, he's still a better anchor than Nexa was in this team. So you've got to give them credit for making that call because obviously a better anchor than Nexa. But I think the really important thing for G2 in 2025 will be whether Malbs can be the true second star, because he didn't have to be in his first 6 months. He was able to be an X factor, and that was fine. That's all we needed from him. But yeah, got to do a bit of glowing on the role cell stuff, obviously. And yeah, some more. These are kind of the new HLTV attributes that I'm trying to use a little bit more because they're simplified versions of things, right? So this one, firepower v utility. So it's kind of like the fragging stats and then kind of flashbang stats and grenade stats. And it kind of paints a picture of there's a clear divide in this team that Snax and Hunter are supportive elements. They're not where we're expecting frags to come from. But is HeavyGod a 1-for-1 for NiKo? Not quite, because NiKo is actually very good at utility as well. And obviously is more of a cerebral player generally as well, which we'll come to. But HeavyGod, at least like against worse opposition last year, was able to match the actual fragging output. So I'm not expecting firepower to be the thing that holds them back. It's more the kind of fit in the team, I guess. But in terms of actual trading stats, it's kind of the same thing. Like NiKo, as much as people on Twitter will call him an entry fragger, not an entry fragger. He's always happier to trade. He'll do his entry routes on the maps he likes, and it's the same with HeavyGod. He's comfortable, but Malbs is going to be bomb site entering still, I think, because it's just not Snax's game is to be the one throwing utility. There's like most in-game leaders now, they kind of want more powerful entry, I guess. Like the hooksy jumping around corners thing is just like it's gone out of fashion big time. I think Malbs kind of showed why on T side that's gone out of fashion as well. And HeavyGod is going to be trading like NiKo was, so it's a good fit again. This is the one thing that's a little bit different is that NiKo is that opener. Like NiKo is that kind of Swiss Army knife who will be aggressive wherever he starts from. And HeavyGod was that in Cloud9, but we're expecting him to be in very different positions. And I think you're going to see maybe HeavyGod and Hunter kind of come to the same point. So this is opening at the bottom. So I think Hunter should be able to be a little bit more aggressive because he's used to being... So previous G2 teams with JKS and stuff, Hunter wasn't the full lurk because it was JKS doing it, right? But with Malbs coming in, he had to take a lot of these lurk spots and he had to take a step back. Maybe deservedly based on performances, but I expect Hunter to have a little bit more agency in the early rounds. I think he'll get a few spots from NiKo as well. It's not a clean 1-for-1 Malbs in all of them. I think they're going to get tossed around a little bit. So this is the good thing for Hunter. I think we should expect maybe not hugely more output, but a little bit more freedom. I think he's going to have more of a voice in the team as well, which will be interesting to see. But the main thing to remember is that HeavyGod, he's more of a late round player than NiKo, even when they were playing similar positions. HeavyGod was more of a trader late round in the same spots. And this is HeavyGod overall to just prove another reason he's a good signing is one, he's really young, and also he can literally play any role. Like he said it in interviews himself. He went from OG being a full lurk to Cloud9 full space taker. And that's just really useful because if there's future...
And he switched languages. And he said he didn't even speak Russian that well. Like he was in terms of a team context. So for him to even have better numbers when he's switching to unfamiliar roles, it's not an unfamiliar language, but it's one where he definitely had a learning curve to it in competing while speaking it and thinking in it. So this is, that's why I've been rating this guy so highly. So many reasons.
Yeah, 100%. And you see like a little bit of drop off in clutching, but he's still in a lot of clutches. But the big thing is the entering. So he was in OG, he would get like very low percentage of his deaths were traded. But in Cloud9 in these new roles, he was all over the place. He was happy to entry. Even with someone like Boomage on his team, he was able to get very high traded death numbers. Like these are very like kind of near IGL level traded death numbers in his entry department. So this is the thing with HeavyGod. He can be... Because I think a lot of the praise for Na'Vi is that they're kind of not a role-less system, but it's kind of all the rifles are able to do the same thing and different things at the same time. And I think HeavyGod is this kind of modern rifler. He can do anything. He's not a specialist as much. Like, he does tend to be a bit more late round, but it's you can see him being able to do what Twist did for FaZe, right? In these like 3vx's, 2vx's, him, Hunter, and Mauisnake, I think HeavyGod is able to be an entry fragger for Mauisnake or someone like that. He's able to make space at any time, and he's able to close rounds if he needs to. So I just think he's a very exciting prospect. So the takeaway from the stats, I would say, is that HeavyGod, if you're going to make the decision to lose NiKo, and we think they have, we think that is their decision, I think it's a perfect signing if you want this anchor lurker to free up Mabs. I think the shortlist for me would have been Bit, Jimmy, and HeavyGod, probably. And Bit and Jimmy were obviously not super realistic. I think Jimmy, I don't know if he was gettable. I assume they tried, and I assume he said no. And Bit, obviously,
I think there's a
million reasons why not. The rumors were he turned them down, yeah. So I think if from a G2 GMing perspective, now that the dust has settled on the Mabs thing, I think their plan to replace NiKo with kind of 2 star players instead of 1, I think it's actually just very smart. And I have to kind of take a little bit of the stuff I said back about the Mabs thing, because when you combine it with an anchor like HeavyGod, and I'm assuming he will be the anchor, of course, but when you combine those two together, I think you are actually doing a very good job of future-proofing your roster and replacing NiKo like in the actual aggregate. So yeah, that's my take on it, at least initially. I think HeavyGod's a very good starting point, but now I'll hand it over to you for the kind of the rest of the story, right?
Let's go back to the start here, Harry, because not even the slide,
literally?
Just in general, the fact that they're replacing NiKo of all players, because you do have the roles that match up a little bit better when you're shifting them around between Malbs and HeavyGod. But NiKo as a player is more than just his roles and his straight impact on the server. The amount of time that he spends talking during matches, the amount of rotations and impact that he has positionally and as a voice on the team aren't really things that you can measure in stats. So when you have a player like that leaving the team, or being allowed to leave the team, as G2 would like to say, how do you actually go about replacing a player like that?
Let's just say this though, that this is a very rare circumstance, but yes, role for role and everything like that does work out between Malbs and HeavyGod, splitting the duties, picking up the slack from NiKo, but they don't win Dallas if HeavyGod is there and if Snax is going to his sister's wedding. Like if it's Stewie for Snax, they're not winning that tournament even remote. We all know that. Like that's not, so there is an intangible element to it beyond just the fragging side of things, beyond the roles. Like NiKo has been an in-game leader in the past. He has been a secondary caller. I don't really remember too many instances actually of listening patch-ins to G2 comms. For whatever reason, during the ESL Pro League patch-ins, we practically just heard Taz comms ad nauseum, much to his detriment, unfortunately. But yeah, it wasn't a lot of NiKo strategizing. However, we have in the past, not really this year as much, but we have heard NiKo makes a lot of shot calls. I mean, when I talked to Stewie, it was just basically NiKo IGLing the entire time at Dallas for them. So that's a secondary voice where, anytime a player is coming up, even if they are incredibly skilled like that, it's rare that they have the macro picture that they're helping weave with the in-game leader. So it's going to be up to people like Hunter to be a greater voice. And to his credit, Hunter was a big voice for G2 in the past, like famously noted as always coming up with their pistol rounds, for example, but he pretty much has to be the secondary caller, bar none.
Mm-hmm. I think it's exactly that. It's going to shine more of a light on the rest of the team, because G2 are one of these teams that people talk about as if it's kind of like impossible to call, just because there's so many people wanting to call their own round. Like, that NiKo and Mauisnake have plans for themselves. Like most of the CT half, it's those two probably calling. But that Hunter's this very, like everyone acts like, from what people say in interviews, he's got the right reads a lot of the time on CT side, especially in those rotate roles when obviously Snax and Hooksy have much less of an idea of what's going on. Sounds like Hunter's doing a lot of it as well. And I think this new team is going to shine a light, especially on the Snax and Taz combo, because in a team with Hunter, NiKo, and Mauisnake all wanting to call their own shots, you can kind of excuse a lot of the tactical stuff because you're looking at it and you're like, okay, these are star players. You want to make them comfortable. It's the right thing to let them be comfortable. But I think with malbs and HeavyGod both kind of adapting to different roles from the last 6 months and in a much higher pressure team environment, I think there's a lot of emphasis on Snax and Taz to kind of bring them out their shells, if you know what I mean. Like, I think it's on them to make the other two comfortable. And obviously Hunter's part of that, but I think primarily this is where we see Snax and Taz become able to put more of a stamp on the team. And I don't think they've probably been able to yet, but so I think now's the time for us to be able to judge them fairly.
I don't know, based on all the comps we hear from Taz, it sounds like he's having a phenomenal impact on the team.
Well, he got better, I've heard.
He did.
Yeah. I agree. He got better. I mean, I forgot what tournament I really started noticing. I think it actually was the fall final, where he actually would call timeouts. Their defense would change, or the strategies on T side would change pretty drastically from being like a default, like just everybody split up everywhere, into focusing more on one part of the map. And it, and also on top of it, I mean, to Taz's credit, he doesn't even have to call a timeout. He'll just point. He'll just point at it. So,
to be fair, I did stand behind them in Rio as well, and I heard him during timeouts. And it isn't like he's just saying what you hear in those little clips that are aired on the broadcast, because those are cutting obviously the tactical bits out, and there is a decent amount to them. It's just he was done super dirty in some of those. But regardless, I think
the people at ESL knew what they were doing for sure. After a while, it was just like because I'm pretty sure you could catch any coach saying something like that at some point in time. But for whatever reason, they were just like, yeah, we're going to feed this whole Taz narrative and perpetuate it. Even though it was clear the timeouts were getting a lot more effective after the first half of the year. I'd say the player break, he probably rethought his role quite a bit.
I think the timing of them also is really important, because I remember you highlighting he would call them sometimes when they were up like 6-0, 6-1, and then they'd just start losing after that.
Yeah, it's like you just gave Blade a timeout. What do you do? Why'd you do that?
So before we talk a little more about Snax and Taz and the players who've already been there, let's talk a little about this role shift and about malbs taking over some of NiKo's roles. Finally getting some of his T-side or CT side spots that he had to move out of when he came into this team. Harry, when you look at this shift happening, where do you see malbs slotting in? Because he doesn't have that kind of voice that NiKo has. And, that does have a lot of impact when it comes to actually playing on the server, regardless of fragging output.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting journey for him, for sure, because he's just not going to have the loudest voice on the team, as much as he's the star player with the raw aim and everything. Like, NiKo's got 10 years of experience in these spots being the voice that everyone listens to. I think it's going to be the biggest challenge for him this year is having that pressure on him to not be the third star anymore. Like, this is the true rifling star now. And those spots are hard. Like, I think in the article that's going to come out, similar topic, but I mentioned the EMA thing, because when he joined Na'Vi, it was obviously a lot of hype around him after Paris and everything. But the requirements to play these positions in a tier 1 team where everyone has to kind of call a lot more around yourselves, especially if you're playing spots like Con or Mirage or something. Like, you're calling a CT side a lot of the time in these positions. Like, you're calling around yourself as the star player. And malbs, did he do that in M80? I've not heard people talk about him as if he did. I mean, I assume he must have done a little bit, but it did kind of more seem like he's this kind of raw aimer who will take the jewels and watched enough donk demos to know roughly what to do, right? Like, that was kind of the impression you got. So in NiKo roles, that you're just not going to be able to do that in G2. He needs to be able to call around himself, and he needs to be coached enough by Snax, by Taz, and even by Hunter outside the server. I'm sure m0NESY will help as well. So I think he's capable of doing it, because every challenge so far in Tier 1, he's risen to it, right? But it is something that's, because on paper it's so easy to say, he'll just go straight back to M80 CT numbers. But I think it probably won't be quite as easy as that, even though the talent is so obviously there. But yeah.
There's also certain positions where he plays ramp on nuke. He always played ramp on nuke his entire career. So it's not that he could swap 1-for-1 with NiKo on, say, that, for example. Connector Mirage makes sense. I'm pretty sure he played one of the middle rifle positions on M80 on Mirage, but
it was common.
I don't really, nothing has ever really jumped out to me in terms of other people's praise of malbs in terms of him being a director for his position, doesn't really control the space around him. So I imagine more of that's going to go kind of in the direction of Hunter. I feel like at least like middle Mirage, for example, I feel like he's going to be the bigger shot caller there. And that's, yeah, more so than even the positional swap. I think you've already kind of touched on it, just that when you are pretty much set up to be the star rifler, you do need to be a shot caller. You do need to ask for people to move around you, because m0NESY is going to call his shots still, but I'm sure that the defense on G2 was structured, or at least formed, to NiKo calling what he's going to do in the second part of a round. And there's still certain things that I found anachronistic almost about NiKo, where the way he plays con, for example, he just kind of sits there the entire round, whereas so many other con people nowadays will try to do something with the A player, or maybe set up like in A, but instead NiKo just ends up in jungle so frequently. After, like, if the T's get mid control, he just sits there. And I think everybody on G2 is really used to playing like that, but I don't know if malbs actually wants to just sit in jungle like a turret, where NiKo was super good at that. I mean, it was playing to his strengths. He could just pick the right fight to take whenever it comes his way. But most people just want to isolate a duel, push ramp with their A player, even push palace, or, I mean, just set up like one sandwich, one under balcony, something like that. So it'll be interesting to see, is malbs going to find himself trying to just follow NiKo, or is he going to actually add his own flair to the positions that plays more to his own comforts, and even sometimes plays more to a modern meta?
We've seen in the past when players, for example, take over IGLing and then go back to being a rifler, they can't play to the same level they used to. Yakinder, prime example, obviously. Do you think malbs having played anchor roles for the last 6 months is going to affect his change back into these kind of aggressive CT positions, or will it not really have an effect?
Nah, I don't really think so. I'm just gonna say, like, from my own experience, like, I've done, when I was playing MDL and stuff, and I had to be a support anchor, but then I would switch the next season to being more of like an active rifler. It comes super naturally. I don't think it's really, you just have to talk a little bit more, but in reality, like, I think most people just prefer that, and so you're just kind of back to your comforts right away. It's not, the IGL thing is the problem with when you go become an IGL and you switch back. You're just stuck looking at the radar way more than you were at any other time. Anchors are just glued looking at their crosshair like, is someone going to walk out on me? Is someone going to walk out on me? If anything, they probably look at their radar less, and so he might have to look at it a little bit more in these rotator spots.
And when you have someone like Yakinder looking at his radar, it's like...
You can't even look at it without...
You can't even look at it.
He has to turn his entire head away from his crosshair. So... yeah, IGL brain for Yakinder is actually what did him dirty. That's why he couldn't recover his form, because if he's staring at that radar, he ain't seeing his screen.
So what you're saying is players can change roles, and roles don't actually matter.
No, they do. They definitely do. They definitely matter. They definitely matter. Some people are better suited for certain things, but I think the swap back to active from passive is a lot easier than switching vice versa.
Yeah, I just really agree on that. I think for someone like malbs as well, he's played kind of every role in his career. Like, he's had to do this before. Like, the star roles in M80 were kind of M80's decision, if I remember correctly. I think they were basically like, bro, you're too good. Why have you played these stupid roles in Brazil? Like, you need to be much more active. So he's done it before, and I think he must have known it was temporary as well. Like, and having played with NiKo, I think the whole time he's playing with NiKo, he's like, I need to make the most of these 6 months and pick up the little tricks he does and things. Like, I think he will play very differently. I think it is going to be more like kind of the standard aggressive rifler. Like on Mirage, he's going to be fighting in Valley a lot more than NiKo did, or something like that. But yeah, I think he's just going to have a lot more experience and know-how from playing with NiKo. I don't think it's going to be a mentality problem for him.
When we have the shift coming in, obviously a big part of it is also HeavyGod. You talked about his versatility. You talked about his adaptability. Him coming in and being able to fill some of these spots that are going to be vacated by malbs, but also in general being able to play this, jack of all trades kind of position where he can fill whatever is needed. How do you feel like that's going to slot in for this G2? Because honestly, on paper, this roster looks better than the Falcons one that NiKo's headed for.
Is that an arguable one?
Yeah, that's gotta be a debate there. The Falcons roster is working with a core three that made it to the playoffs of the major, a Majisk that many people consider. Okay, I'll say my opinion of Majisk is that sometimes you can only do so much as an anchor.
Yes.
Not that I think he was doing a great job, but he was doing a solid job. Like him and Sun Pius were kind of my players on that team where I was like, okay, I'm not mad at you guys, but you're definitely not lifting this team up to be beyond anything that the other three are unfortunately leaving you wanting on. So I don't know. The Falcons roster versus the G2 one today. I like the IGL better for Falcons. I like the Star Rifler better. I'll take NiKo today over malbs. I mean, as much as I like malbs. I'll take m0NESY over Dexter. But say Tessus and Majisk for HeavyGod and Hunter, I might say it's like pretty 50-50 there. Like I'm not leaning super hard in one direction, I'll say that. I'm just because HeavyGod hasn't proven himself as much against elite teams, like top 5. You know, he's actually incredibly, every time I've watched him play a top 20 team, I'm always happy he doesn't embarrass himself. I think that will scale against the top 10 teams in the world pretty well, but versus top 5 teams, I just don't even think I've seen that. So I can't really even comment.
And he did struggle a bit at the major as well, because it was kind of, it's the RMR where he got a lot of hype because he was playing so well, and then you kind of watch him in the major and he kind of went back to earth a little bit. And I think people underestimate just how little he's actually played on LAN as well. Like that was probably his first arena game, if you're counting the Shanghai group stages in arena, which I didn't. Sorry, Alish. But yeah, it should count in a way in terms of his experience, because someone like Mouse has been able to pick up that experience in the last 6 months, right? And HeavyGod will be coming in a little bit differently. But yeah, I think but the thing with G2 and why I kind of like it more than Falcons is more where these players are going to be in 2 years or so. So like NiKo and Majisk are obviously better than malbs and HeavyGod right now. Like they just are.
Yes.
Majisk, even in a down year, you could see the quality. Like when people hit his site, he'd still have that kind of the Jimmy thing of where he just find individual jewels while they're executing on him. He still has that. Like you don't lose that just because your team's rubbish that year, right? I think Majisk is going to be much better this year. I think he should be back. And HeavyGod, it's going to be a learning process in different roles again, but he's so much younger. This G2 core of if they can keep m0NESY, which I think is a big if, especially if the Falcons team does well early on, and you kind of get into that contract season, I think that's the big struggle for G2 is whether they can keep m0NESY. But a core of m0NESY, HeavyGod, and malbs is very good GMing if you're confident of keeping them for the next 3-4 years. It's kind of like what we wanted from FaZe with the Robson twist. It's like, oh, if Karrigan and Rain drop off, then we've still got this kind of young fragging core, right? And I think with malbs and HeavyGod, if all goes well, like that's going to be a very, very good rifling duo, because in theory, they should get better than what they currently are.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think the Falcons roster has surprisingly done better than I thought they would when they were starting to get linked to moves like adding Jambo, which was just, they would have fallen apart, I think. But regardless of that, when you have this G2 rebuilding around these players, you are going to end up with, you know, do you think they're going to have a similar honeymoon to what they did when they brought malbs in?
Weirdly, I think they won't have the same honeymoon, because I think there's too many people learning too many things. I think malbs slotting in without a lot of pressure was able to just be the kind of headshot machine that we know he is. And then NiKo could lead the way and be more confident knowing there's more firepower. And m0NESY, obviously, it's just unknown quantity. I think that was so perfect for the honeymoon and just the raw firepower. I think this team is going to have a harder time trying to get that same output of firepower, but considering there's going to be a little bit of adjustment and change in comfort for some of these players. We're kind of an increase in comfort long term, but I think short term, I think there's going to be a lot of kind of tweaks to the system that you've relied on for so long with NiKo around.
I would argue they need that honeymoon, because in 6 months, you have to make your case for whether you're keeping m0NESY, whether he's staying, or whether he's going. I think a lot of what is generally not talked about behind the scenes, but the sentiment is that m0NESY has a certain period where he's able to judge whether this roster can be better than Falcons or not. And this is going to be a really crucial period for G2 to be able to make that case. So in my opinion, at least, they need that honeymoon to be able to make that case. Otherwise, Mondesi might be headed out.
Oh, I feel like
confirmed the 6-month thing. Sorry.
I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but that's what like rumors are suggesting, that they have a limited amount of time, whether it's 6 months, whether it's the end of this year, to actually make that case. But the longer you go on, the less time you have, because those contract negotiations start earlier than you'd think.
Yeah, and as a Liverpool fan as well, seeing all our star players leave, so it's danger. You don't want players like Mondesi entering a situation like that while you're rebuilding, and I think it will be interesting to see how they deal with it. But I'm quite worried that Mondesi, just the appeal of NiKo is going to be too strong regardless, and also knowing that Falcons are going to continually upgrade until they win that major. Like the money just doesn't matter. Time barely matters. They're just going to keep going. And this team, as much as it is kind of a scramble for ranking points again, just like the Ents team was for the RMR spot, I think it's proof that they're just doubling down. It's the same approach again of just get the ranking point core and then have a star player now in NiKo. And I think Mondesi it's an inevitable thing, probably unfortunately for G2, but most of me wants Mondesi to stay in G2 and stay and see how HeavyGod and malbs develop, because I think I just really like the move. I just really like the two kind of youngsters being the star riflers and having a kind of core around them to learn from. But yeah, if you were Mondesi, I would see why he would leave. Put it that way. I think there's more certainty in NiKo than there is in any other player in the world as a rifler. Well, maybe Donk, but I don't think that's happening.
I feel like if I'm Mondesi and I'm constantly keeping my eye out for Falcons, the thing is that I'm pretty sure after not too long, he will inevitably consider the idea that if he's in there for Dexter, that team is just better than G2, because I think that would tip the scale pretty convincingly. If you just swap Dexter and Mondesi on G2 Falcons is the better team for my money. So that's a perspective that I would hold if I were in his shoes. And so if the money's bit better, if the team is better, if the coach is better, I don't know what's really keeping him tied down to G2, other than I don't know if he really has any kind of moral thing, or he likes the G2 org, or any kind of stance that would prevent him from going there when he's been linked in discussions with them now numerous times.
I wanted to get your thoughts on HeavyGod, Alex, 'cause I know that you were a big proponent of him when he first.
I got his jersey from OG. I got his OG jersey.
Do you have his jersey? I think you did an interview with him at some point as well.
I've had him on my stream a couple times.
Yeah. So just your general thoughts on him moving to this team, how you feel like he's going to actually slot in.
I mean, he's had that mentality that a lot of people always praise in other players. Very open, very, I'd say straightforward on a lot of things. He's not too PR in his answers, but he was getting better at interviews. Like, honestly, when I was interviewing him on stream, I don't know of any public interviews that were out of him at that time. So could tell he wasn't super comfortable either, despite doing those. In terms of also just kind of like, he was playing with Fiku, some other people on OG. Keto was calling, and he still didn't say a single bad thing. Okay, like that's pretty hard. That's pretty difficult to just stay that positive when he was on that roster. And so the fact that nobody's talked about him being a problem, also, that's a good sign. Like, him and malbs are probably cut from a similar cloth in terms of mentality. And, everybody, I look at malbs as a role model for the North American scene, essentially, at this point, just having a great attitude, never being seen as toxic or anything like that. And I think the same can be said about HeavyGod, unless there's something not to my knowledge, but I'll see his name on the sidebar if it's there, and no one's saying anything like that. So he's an adaptability that is obviously worth praise too, given what he did with Cloud9, switching language, switching spot, switching style, not really being as much of a focal point in the same way. Like, even though he was an anchor on OG, for example, they still did sometimes set him up with like an Anubis extremity play that kind of focused on his ability to trade or something. Like, they'll send a middle guy, like a guy from middle, to be an A, like the first guy out on like an A pop on like CT side Anubis. So I don't think he got that same sort of treatment on Cloud9. He just got to play better spots and still did very well. In fact, arguably better. So I in all capacities of like intangible and in server, I rate him incredibly highly. The versatility is just the biggest thing that has jumped out at me over the course of 2024. I don't think many people could actually improve their rating by switching spots and getting more responsibility on a team with more eyeballs on it. Like if you do badly on OG, nobody's even going to say anything. Like they just think that they just chalk that up to the org or the other players that are around you. He was doing incredibly well there. Cloud9 was a bright spot, obviously, and so I'm really happy to see him have this opportunity. But again, I haven't seen him show any signs of being some kind of general in the server, like a floor general, or just saying, guys, let's do this, let's make this kind of play. It just kind of feels like things come to him and he has such a strong aptitude and just ability to handle various situations that he knows how to deal with it individually. I don't know if that means he can play off of teammates always and make people around him better.
That's the thing. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go?
No, you go, Harry.
It's okay. So what I want to see from him, because I think he does have the personality for it, just quickly, is that like he does kind of seem like the anchor lurker, like the kind of anchor lurker typical personality of that kind of reserved nature. I think that really suits him. And I think the way he breaks out further and becomes this kind of top 20 player that I think he's easily capable of is to become a specialist in these anchor lurker roles and actually nail that down and stop being known as the guy that can play any role and start being known as the guy who's the best in his roles. And I think he's got the potential to be, like a finalist for Anchor of the Year next year. I think that's very, very doable in this G2 team, especially if Manassy's there the whole time. So I think that's the one thing I want from him next year is to kind of embrace whatever roles he does end up having and being a full-on specialist in it. Because I think that it just makes you a better player. It's so much easier once. We saw that with Bit as well, playing lots of different roles. And then once he became that full anchor lurker, I think he actually improved. And I think we could see a similar thing maybe with HeavyGod.
There's very few players that we've seen that are able to do that consistently for a long period of their career and still excel. Like Rain would be one of them who's shifted a lot of positions over time and actually able to still perform to a high level, but we don't have a ton that can do that.
Naf?
So Naf as well, yeah. But again, these are like rare couple of players throughout the last 10 years that you can pick out. So I agree with you. I think having someone actually centered into those roles and having him able to morph around that is helpful. I do want to talk a bit about what you said earlier about his performance at the major, because that also came down a little bit to C9's T-sides looking pretty pathetic, and that definitely held him back a little bit. So do you think it's going to be an issue for them with him coming into G2 now, when you said that, he didn't perform that well at the major, but was that really all on him?
I mean, of course it is. And I think that team was... like weirdly, it was almost the RMR where we got rejected interviews after it. I think it was the last chance qualifier that they lost to FaZe for the Legend stage. Like genuinely, there was a weird shift in the whole team attitude because they lost this Legends decider game that ended up being null and voided anyway. But they were very upset with each other after that game, and I think when they came into the challenger stage, it just seemed different. I don't know what happened, and then obviously the team's completely blown up afterwards. So yeah, you can't blame him. And I think he's the reason they got to the major in the first place. So you have to give him credit for that. And I think just T-sides just generally, especially from a G2 context, it's just the onus isn't going to be on him as much. He's going to be the kind of bedrock, the floor of the team in a way. And I think it's just going to be more on other people, especially on T-side. So I think, yes, it does end up being more of a team problem than a him-specific problem. You just kind of have to... This is always the thing with arena games, that you can't call someone a choker until they've played quite a lot of arena games, really, because he's played 5, 6 or 7. We normally need 50 before you can say this guy actually struggles under pressure. And like Alex was saying earlier, I think it's most of the time when you see him against a top 20 team, he's the underdog in all of those games. This whole year he's been the underdog and he's still holding up. So I think that's where you've got to see this kind of scale up in a much better team like G2.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the HeavyGod angle of it, before we move on, do you guys have any final thoughts on just those two parts of the G2 move?
I mean, I didn't feel like his major was that bad. I mean, he played badly in the final deciding series, but
Last 3 maps weren't great.
yeah, I guess so. But he played super well to kick it off. So it was, yeah, I mean,
He got me my fantasy points. Put it that way.
I think I had him actually, or I had Blame F actually. I think I picked Blame F, which messed me up. But either way, I'm still salty about fantasy, so don't bring it up, please. Just because I put the team in the wrong group or whatever. Yeah, I don't. Well, that Cloud9 team, I don't know. It maybe deserves a different conversation entirely. I don't really want to just go heavy into them right now. I'll just like he looked really good on that team for as much as I watched. And the major, obviously, I didn't really expect them to beat Complexity once they reached that point either. So it wasn't a huge shocker. I guess I wanted him to perform better individually, sure, but with a team versus a team that in Cloud9 that to me didn't quite figure out what they were great at T-side. Like they just kind of did too many explosive poppy plays when I don't feel like all their players probably are even best suited for that. And to play a Complexity team that was one of the longest standing 5-man rosters at the major period in both stages, like them and I think there was a couple, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just like, you know, I expect the team in that kind of higher pressure environment, the one with more experience together, if they're of similar skill, that they're going to edge it out. So also their vetoes were weird. I think they picked some weird stuff actually.
Yeah.
I forgot. I can't remember exactly the ones, but I remember the sentiment in general when I was covering them or watching on with their games, just kind of like, why did they pick X map instead of this other map? I remember them. I just kind of remember them going against the vetoes that I sort of drew up on my notes a couple times, and I was like, okay, and it didn't work out. So I can't cite those examples one for one though. But yeah, no, I feel like they were let down by prep in a couple ways for the major.
Moving on
At
from the
least Groove
Cloud9.
didn't do his permaban again, but yeah.
Oh yeah, we love that.
Moving on from the Cloud9 bit, at least. Also, to what Harry said, arena games do actually matter. Fun fact, especially for the top 20, that sample size is important. So, you know, anyone who had a liege higher in their lists, it's just gotta look out for that. But
it also wasn't just that, by the way. But yeah, that's a different show.
Before we go into just the rest of the pieces of G2, the ones who are already there, I do want to take a look at the experts on the HLTV forums, as we always like to do here. So first up, we have G2 if. Damn, imagine if Hunter was taken out and HeavyGod in. NiKo doesn't leave. Then you would have NiKo and malbs on strong spots with m0NESY opping. This would have been way better than the overhyped Falcons. This shit would straight up nuke enemy team, even with world's worst calls. From friendly user 1 with a Polish flag who loves Zywoo. So just your general thoughts on this.
Wait,
this
he wants what
move.
5-man lineup right now?
He wants
NiKo for
HeavyGod
Hunter.
in for Hunter.
Oh, NiKo for
And
Hunter?
NiKo stays. No, NiKo stays. HeavyGod in for Hunter.
Oh, HeavyGod for Hunter. Well, if he thinks the calls don't matter, why doesn't he just do HeavyGod for Snax? He could play all of his anchor spots on CT side. The calls clearly don't matter. This would be the best 1-for-1 CT side anyways. If HeavyGod was anchoring B on Mirage, it's going to be like Yimpat levels of destruction, okay? That's not a bomb site you want to go to, okay? Trust me. Like, Hunter would sometimes have to carry that bomb site single-handedly with any anchor, with Snax, with Hooksy. There was games where like Hunter would have 15 kills on CT side and Hooksy would have 1, if even that. So if he had HeavyGod, oh my, dude, again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you call. It doesn't matter. There's no strategy. You're not getting past that.
My favorite thing about this move, now you just made me think, is that probably HeavyGod's going to get to play B on Dust 2, because watching Snax and Hunter play B on Dust 2, like, especially at first, like just after malbs joined, that was some of the worst thing I've ever seen. Like, that's genuinely like Zeus Edward level. No idea what they're doing. And like, they got much better. Like, I think Snax, like by the end of the year, did kind of get to this kind of like average IGL level performances, which is an upgrade on Hooksy, of course. So I think he probably deserves a bit of credit for that. But yeah, I think obviously keeping NiKo is better in any situation. Like it's NiKo. Like, oh, the best rifler of all time is good actually. Like, yeah, thanks forums.
I mean, this whole post is moot anyway, as one of the comments said. I closed the tab, so I don't know what the user was, but it said, doesn't matter, NiKo would never kick family member anyway. So just wouldn't happen, would it?
We'll just leave them behind, I guess.
Yeah,
exactly.
we also have G2 plus Boris. Any thoughts on this move? Doesn't say who it's for, of course. Doesn't say who it's for. Just G2 plus Boris.
Yeah, as a sixth. Yeah.
If you could just play him on Mirage T side, then I'm kind of in. Imagine him and Malbs running at you. I think I'd quit, to be honest.
Yeah, it'd be good. In an entry pack. The Boros Malbs entry pack it'd be also devastating. I don't know how. Snax could call the same strategy 12 rounds in a row. It'll probably work 9. Doesn't matter.
We also
It's just
have
layering. It's just conditioning.
Yeah, it's all conditioning. You don't get it. You don't get it.
we also have G2 plans to put Hunter to IGL role in the future, and that they should have gotten Perfecto.
Perfecto
Any thoughts?
Perfecto
instead of quote unquote fat ass T side baiter HeavyGod.
Oh, I thought it was going to be... That's mean. I thought it was going to be about Snax. Then I would have laughed. But no, that's just rude now.
We know this adds power anyway. It's Gordo cold. It's fine. Like, leave HeavyGod alone. But yeah, I mean, Perfecto, again, you're buying players who have peaked already. I like this from GC because they're buying players who haven't peaked yet. Like, it's just a better way to do things, especially in a new game like CS2. Like, we've not seen Perfecto for ages. We've got no idea what that guy's going to be like. Like, this isn't 2021.
Which sucks, by the way.
So you go for your name value, but I'll keep my fat ass. Thank you very much.
Yeah, HeavyGod is definitely better than Perfecto today. That's something that I would... If you're actually a GM and you would take Perfecto over HeavyGod today, you will face 100 years of NIP. So that's really your punishment, you know. I don't.
Even if you're rushing speaking as well.
Yeah, no, I'm not. There's no world where Perfecto is better than HeavyGod today. Period. Unless he has to actually play literally with Simple. Unless he actually has to sit next to Simple and deal with the multitude of emotions that can come out of him, then maybe Perfecto is more battle hardened and ready for that kind of challenge. But in every other context, I would take HeavyGod.
Shifting gears back to, I guess, some more serious conversation. I'll still use an HLTV comment to do it, but can G2 win a major in 2025? Because this comment said G2 will win a major in 2025.
I think we're due another parity era. I think everyone's loading up on firepower. I think there's probably still going to be the kind of big six, and maybe Falcons could potentially join them because of the NiKo factor and everything. I think it's another year where the majors are a massive toss-up of who's in the best form going in and who has enough time to prepare properly going in, and who's going to be watched a bit less because, you know, obviously Spirit were watched a bit less and won the major, and Navi were watched a bit less and won the major. Like, teams that are able to adapt. So I think 1 in 7 chance, because I just think this parity era is just, I don't see it coming to an end at the moment. I just don't see any team breaking it. I think the teams are all kind of too similar and too all firepower focused, I think. Like, I just don't see an era coming, but I also can't see G2 breaking that parity era with this lineup.
I would just say that I don't necessarily think that the players on G2 like malbs and HeavyGod are bad, but I feel like in the big pressure games, I'm already willing to give them a pass when they don't live up to their group stage standards, even against top teams in the world, just because they haven't faced that sort of pressure repeatedly enough. Malbs, obviously, in the quarterfinal versus Heroic was great, but in the semifinal versus FaZe, it's pretty bad. And I was obviously, well, I wasn't on the desk for that one, but I would have given Malbs the pass for sure, just because that's kind of what I expected. And I don't think that the shoes that he has to fill. He's going to be ready for. He's not going to be ready. I don't think he's going to be ready for it in Austin. The second major of the year, so much can change. So can G2 win? Yeah, like I guess. What's 1 in 7? Like, what is that divide? What is that percentage wise? I would.
What a test.
I would say
a little under or a little over 0.2.
Like 14%. Well, 14%. Yeah, that's a pretty good number. That's a pretty good number, and I'd probably put most of that into the second major of the year and the uncertainty behind it. But I would almost just say for the first major of the year, I'd give him like 10% at best. 10% at best, and that's with that team that they're working with. So I'd pick a handful of teams before them. I'd pick FaZe, I'd pick Vitality, I'd pick Spirit, I'd pick Navi, I'd pick Maus. And it's not like this is just like each one gets the same slice of the pie. I'm giving Spirit and Navi bigger slices of this percentage pie.
And that's with m0NESY, who was the best arena player this year, was amazing in arenas the year before as well. Like, there is a world where Malbs, because Malbs' arena rating was a big part of his top 20 placing this year as well. Like, it was a very small sample size, a lot of blasts and everything, but that FaZe one was the kind of exception, I guess, for his overall performance in arenas this year. And you can say, like, okay, it's going to be different in styles and everything, but I can see a world where they do kind of pop off in that one select tournament, because that's always been what G2 are made for, is kind of having years where there's forum threads about them being rubbish every 2 weeks, and then they'll just peak at like 3 or 4 tournaments a year. And I don't know if that's a NiKo thing or a G2 thing, but that's the historic thing. And if you peak at the right one with m0NESY on a 1.5 rating, which is not impossible, then I think Malbs can be a good enough supporting cast to win a major in the next year. I just think you can make a similar case for, like Maui said, like literally all 7 of those teams that were in the Big Six and Falcons. I think you can argue for anyone. So it's fence sitting for me.
Before we wrap up, let's talk about the remaining pieces of G2. I mean, Alex was on the Snax hate train for a long time. Don't know if he's still a passenger. Are you hopping off at any of the upcoming stops?
I felt like I was the conductor for a while. I really felt like I was the conductor. I feel like I made the claim immediately that Taz should be fired before we even watched a single game of them playing. Probably throw Pekka in for the move at initially also. But I'm not on the Taz hate train anymore. I'm gonna make that abundantly clear. I saw enough good stuff in the second half. The Snax hate train, I think this is where we see it. I think this is where we see the isolated variable of having one of the best secondary callers of all time and best rifler of all time departing your team. Are you going to feel a lot more hollow when there is clearly an absent that has to be filled? Are you going to be able to take that space, or are you going to let the air sit and be unable to actually rally your team, who you're supposed to be the in-game leader of to begin with anyways? Are you going to rally them to be able to make deep tournament runs when NiKo kind of had your back at all times, when NiKo could really pick up the slack if you weren't capable of delivering in a high-pressure moment? Because also, by the way, like, you know, Taz in the beginning, in some of the comms that were leaked and interviews, even in losers interviews, was saying we needed to trust Snax more. I don't know. I feel like did they actually change and trust Snax more when they won the fall finals and the world finals, or was NiKo even calling better from a secondary position at that point? Like, I don't know. I don't know if trusting Snax more actually led to those, because most of the winners interviews didn't really actually indicate that. They didn't really indicate that we listened to Snax more and that's why we won this tournament. That's not. They said like he made good calls. I heard that. I did hear that. I'll usually hear that at least once for any winning team ever, period. So except for Spirit, Chopper. They just don't say a lot. Yeah, they just don't say a lot. I was gonna say that.
They praised Chopper before. I've seen it.
They just glaze Hally instead and make.
Yeah, no, that's why I
make hour-long documentaries to secure Coach of the Year votes. Like, that's just unbelievable work from Spirit's marketing team.
Yeah, Hally actually. That's why I put Hally in my top 3, but I did not put Chopper in my top 3. Revealing my ballot live.
Honestly, just quickly on Hally. Mega plus rep for him, because the after party for the major, he literally brought a spirit translator over to chit chat with people in English, which was just fantastic. That's just great. It's nice to talk to, a coach like Hally when he doesn't speak English. I mean, he says he doesn't speak English. He can definitely understand like a couple of things and can probably have some conversations. But the fact that he does that to even just talk about CS, I respect that. But I will say my coach of the year vote still went to Blade. Harry, you had something
Nice
to
for
say?
you guys to get votes, but no.
You
I was
have
just
the
thinking
votes on the HLTV top 20, so you get
Yeah,
that.
I've got the big boys, but that always goes well for me. It's first year getting death threats. This one, so it's we're going up in the world. But yeah, it's.
But
I
you
would say for
included
Snax,
Xantares. But you included Xantares.
He wasn't high enough, is what I've been told. But yeah, so Snax. I think the Snax Game of Legion experience will probably help him in this team as well. I think kind of knowing how to get the best out of young players, even if maybe he didn't always do it. I think there's a world where Snax's experience is really good for Mabs and HeavyGod. I just think, like you said, there's too many variables in a G2 team to judge the calling. It's why I was often quite quick to defend Hooksy, because I think he was very good at kind of the emotional side of the calling, at least when he was at his best, of kind of knowing when the right time is to slow down and actually kind of overcall the kind of over mighty players and that G2 are known for, right? So can Snax take on more responsibility? I think he should be able to. Like this is something where you have to earn your money as an in-game leader next year, because this is on you. Like 100%. I think that he's the kind of the hinge on which this project kind of lies. I think even more so than a Mabs or HeavyGod. I think he's the one that decides how well this team does, is if he can pick up the slack from NiKo.
Do you think it's just a slack from NiKo, or is there also a lot of slack from Hunter? Because he had a pretty down year initially. I don't know how this is going to work out with him, because I think there was also originally, I don't even remember where I saw it, but there was some rumors that he could join for, Sphinx could join for Hunter. As far as you know, don't think that's happening anymore, or was happening, who knows. But the fact that that replacement could have been on the table, just general thoughts on Hunter being a part of this team and the way that's going to proceed with these changes.
I actually think
ideal worlds. Oh no, you go.
I always think that the way that you should build a team to just kind of bounce off, use as a springboard or a launch pad, is 2 veterans, 3 youngsters, and they have that sort of makeup right now. It's through interesting means, given that they're old veteran that usually gets phased out because he's getting kind of washed, isn't actually washed at all. In fact, he's better than the youngster replacement in terms of fragging. But the voice of Hunter is what I find most important about him now.
Yes.
I don't really think that. I think Hunter's days of being an HLTV top 20 player are behind him. I don't think the hot take, Hunter will never be on the HLTV top 20 again. Boom. Okay, there. That's like I don't see any world where that happens. But Hunter's teammates will probably vouch for him until the end of time, and the shift towards in-game leader also, I feel, is actually fairly likely. I don't want him to kind of go the Crim's route, where I think Crim's probably should have pivoted in some way at this point. The fragging fell off. He is kind of playing a more supportive role. Probably should have just taken up the role and then extended his life a little bit. He probably is still playing with Fnatic. I don't think I think he's still there, but you know what I mean? It's just, I think Hunter is going to inevitably have to do that. And that's probably easily within the next 2 years.
I think it's a similar case to
it's
Rain.
a natural
right?
shift for him going forward.
Nope. Sorry, what?
I think it's just a natural shift for him
Yeah.
going forward, because he does it so much already. He's
Yeah,
getting
exactly.
older. You can kind of see some of these things coming for sure.
Yeah, it's just I didn't see him. Like, I think it's more like he becomes an in-game leader than an anchor. Just the way he plays CT sides and the way he likes to call around the kind of shifting setups and things. I think it's much more likely he becomes more active of voice rather than stepping back and kind of the traditional kind of star player route to worse roles. I think he's going to be a rotator as long as he plays. I think we've seen enough now. I think if Mabs wasn't going to get the rotate roles, then I don't think anyone will. I think this is where he likes to be kind of the apex style rotator, where he's helping his anchor a lot more. And I think there's a place for that. There's a place for that, because when you have weak anchors, I think you just get exposed in a lot of modern CS. I think it's too easy to kind of punish the kind of classic Ingham leader anchor. I think having a supportive rotator and then a star anchor like HeavyGod is actually a better balance a lot of the time. So I think he'll be able to extend his career that way and just being the veteran. But yeah, obviously, like raw paper, on blank paper, I'd rather have NiKo than Hunter in this team being the veteran. I think everyone would. But I can see why G2 kind of did what they did, knowing like the financials and all that.
When you say planning for the future with him becoming an IGL, do you see Hunter taking over as IGL for G2, going elsewhere? Do you see them replacing Snax and having Hunter be IGL? Where do you see that in his future?
In a while, I think. I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. But it just feels like a natural thing. He feels like, when some teams have like IGLs and captains, it feels like Hunter could easily be a captain type figure. Like it's almost like the Apex transition, where it kind of just, even if sometimes like their reputation didn't make as much sense, I think the kind of the way they behave around a team really makes sense. Like if you see him in team talks and stuff like that, he's a super serious guy and he's able to command that respect. So I think it's just a natural transition, but I don't think Snack should be looking over his shoulder just yet, I think.
I ask more so because this move kind of sees G2 betting a bit more on youth, on the next generation of players. So when you have that coming in, is this G2 future-proofed yet?
Do we keep Mauisnake or not?
We'll have to see.
If you're talking about the three youngsters, malbs, HeavyGod, Mauisnake, then yeah, this would be also set up pretty nicely if, say, Maus starts to get picked apart, as it was rumored they were in the previous season. Then such a natural swap to just get Shuhei in there for Snax at some point. So if especially given, I'm sure Maus has the best tier 2 IGL on their NXT team without me even looking right now who it is. So
they sold him to OG. That's the problem.
Unfortunate.
They'll have a buyback. This game really
yeah. It's a loan. It's a loan. It's a discreet loan that we don't know about. So I think yes, this is what future proofing looks like. If I don't know the terms of the contracts, but yeah.
As we've kind of broken down every player we could talk about, I mean, we didn't go too much into Mauisnake individually. I don't think there's too much to talk about that wasn't covered in the whole encompassing discussion, and him trying to, whether he stays on, whether he doesn't stay on. But as a whole, is there any final words you have about this G2? Anything that you might want to bait some fans on with HLTV? G2 fans come here. Mauisnake's thread about to unfold.
Well, I mean, I think that the main storyline I'm going to be following with G2 going into the season, as opposed to like a simple hot take, is like, okay, all the people that are mostly Polish people coming into my mentions, just cursing at me, who think that Snax is some kind of godlike in-game leader. This is the one-for-one that makes his job on paper actually kind of easy. You know, the roles still fit, everything's fine, but it's just obviously a less active talker that is being brought in for NiKo. I need to see Snax take charge in these kinds of moments more so than he did in the past with just super basic calls out of spawn that literally anybody could call. Like anybody could call. That was my biggest concern. Like it wasn't insane mid-rounding from G2 almost ever, but it was mostly just, wow, the sheer firepower of this T side is impossible for anybody to deal with. And so if he's actually a good IGL and I don't get it, and I'm talking also about that Polish tier 2 coach guy that was in my mentions too, I forgot his name. If everything you guys said is true, then let's see it. Let's see it. Will I be rooting for HeavyGod and malbs and Mauisnake to do well? Yes, I like them all as players. I really, really enjoy them. But am I going to be surprised when this team's T side doesn't keep up the same blistering numbers that it held when they were able to just run into any bomb site and not give a shit about how they got there. No, like, I mean, if it drops to like a 52% T-side round win rate, I'm just going to kind of say I told you so.
Harry, thoughts on their blistering T-side win rate on maps such as Nuke, your favorite thing to outline during the major?
Well, I got in trouble for that as well, didn't I? But no, it's... Look, I think a map like Nuke is something that exposed how much they rely on NiKo working outside. And I think it's going to be maps like that, which will be really interesting because, like you said a long time ago now, but you said Malbs was a lobby ramp player on M80. Like, I think Nuke will probably just be their like 5th best map or something. I think NiKo was such a big reason why they were good at Nuke. I think it's a very hard map to call on at the best of times. So I don't expect that one to improve. And yeah, I think it's the same sentiment with G2. Like, Maui's a big part of why that's a narrative, but it's kind of an obvious one anyway, is that the calls don't need to be complicated when you've got NiKo and m0NESY and Malbs. Like, that trio is just so deadly, it doesn't matter. In 2025, it will matter. It really will matter what Snax does with these pieces. And I think that is the key thing to be watching out for, as well as Malbs in these new roles. I think this really is kind of Snax's time to shine and kind of prove everyone wrong, because he's not had a load of defenders so far who aren't from his country, but maybe in 6 months, we'll be some of them. You never know.
Lastly, anything you want to plug, any shout outs you want to make, Alex, before we close this one down?
Just shout out to HLTV for letting me vote. Make it feel, I love voting. That's why I live in America. No, that's actually, yeah, no, I'm just kidding. Thanks for letting me vote. I'll be at the HLTV Awards. So if anybody wants to say hi, please do so. I don't bite. My Twitter persona is not the same as who I am in person. And that I'll probably be co-streaming all of the ESL events this year, as far as I know. As far as I know, if I'm allowed to. But check me at the events that I'm actually working, like the Blast Bounty coming up. So that's pretty much it. I think people see me around. So thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.